Hi friends, I'm Joe, and this is episode number 205 of the Decahedron Fanish podcast. And, okay, so this is a bit weird. I came out here and I recorded yesterday, and I talked about, two items. And I said, and there won't be an episode next week. And then while I was in bed, in my dreams, I guess, wow, I'm dreaming about the podcast. That's weird. But I said, it would make sense just to split those up into two different episodes. Because A, I like shorter episodes anyway. B, each episode would be about one topic. And C, I can save one of them for next week. So that's what I'm going to do. But I'm not going to re-record everything because that's just silly. So in the intro you're about to hear, it's going to say that I'm going to talk about railroading and narrative games. And then I'm going to talk about some Star Trek stuff. I'm not talking about Star Trek stuff. I'm going to cut that off, and then next week I'm going to play that bit for the Star Trek bit, because really they have nothing to do with each other. So why combine them? So that's what I'm going to do. So I'm sorry there was any weirdness in what you're about to hear, but yeah, I think it will be better in the long run. So thanks for watching or listening. Let's get to it. Hi friends, I'm Joe, and this is episode number 205 of the Decahedron Fanish podcast. Hey, how are you doing today? Funny thing, I woke up this morning, I took my shower, I got dressed, normal stuff, and then I was like, oh, I should record today, and I'm like, what is my, what is my media update? What did I talk about this movie last week? So I fired up last week's video and I was wearing the same shirt. So that's kind of funny. Anyway, so what's happened this week? So this week I saw The Death of Robin Hood movie in the theater with Hugh Jackman. And it was pretty good. I liked it. I'm not sure a whole lot of people would. It's kind of an arts film. And I say that because it was distributed by A24, which is kind of a artsy distributor to begin with, and had almost no promotion. Like, you didn't see Hugh Jackman showing up on all the talk shows and everything to promote it. And it was in the theater for like exactly 2 weeks, and then it left, at least our local one. And I was getting the impression, and I don't know if it's true, it's just, my theory. I was getting the impression that they were just trying to meet the minimum requirements to be eligible for award seasons. But when you're doing that, you normally don't do a summer release. So I don't know. Maybe it just didn't do as well as they hoped, going up against Minions and Toy Story 5, but it's a whole different audience. So I don't know what the story is. That was my theory. But it was pretty good. One of the reasons I wanted to see it, besides being a Robin Hood fan, is a few months ago, I was like, I really want to write a short story about the death of Robin Hood based on the ballads. The most modern interpretations of Robin Hood come to us from Ivanhoe, which was written in the 1800s. Is that right? 1700s? If you're watching on YouTube, it will be on screen right now. Anyway, and they took a lot of liberties with the story, to modernize it for their period. Of course, every time we see a version, that's even modernized even more. So I was like, what if I just go back to the oldest ballads we have and make it based on that? That would be kind of cool. And so while I was researching for the ballads and everything, I came across this ad for the Hugh Jackman one. I'm like, oh. And so for a while, I wasn't going to write the story. And I wrote about it in the APA, and somebody said, well, if you wait for Hollywood to take a break from Robin Hood, you'll never get to write it. I'm like, yeah, good point. So I wrote it, and I just wanted to see how my take on the death of Robin Hood differed from their take. My take was much more faithful to the ballads, and I used an older form of the ballad, based on some of the scenes. I would say that they were using the Bishop Percy version of the ballads. And but even then, they took a lot of liberties where I was very sure to, in my story, not contradict anything that was in the ballad and tried to include everything that survived from the ballad. There's a lot in the ballad that was missing. This is a funny story. Bishop Percy was an Anglican bishop in England. Rich guy, right? No such thing as a poor bishop in those days. And he had this book of ancient ballads that predated him by a good period, and his maid was tearing pages out of the book to light fires. And so when it's called Child Ballad 120A. And so when you look at it, it will have these quatrains, and then it will say half a page missing, and then it'll have some more, and then it'll say half a page missing from where the maid was just ripping out pages to light fire. And it is the only known copy to exist, so we don't know what's on those pages. But anyway, I was sure not to contradict anything. I was sure not to omit anything of the surviving parts and insert what I think would go into the missing bits that would appeal to us as a modern audience. Like I said, they went a different way. They were more influenced by the newer version, the Bishop Percy version. So, like when, yeah, you don't care. What he did was he looked at the ballads and he made up a version too. But he, instead of doing what I did and said, this is based on what survived, he said, this is the original. And he had completely redone it. And it's very Victorian sensibilities at that point, right? Robin is now a noble instead of being a commoner, a yeoman, like he was in the originals. Anyway, so the movie is based more on those, and even then they took great liberties. What I thought was funny, though, is that both me and the movie gave Little John a wife, and we both named her Margaret. I don't know where they came up with it. I came up with it because I figured people in that day would have either Anglo-Saxon names, I placed it a little further in the past, Anglo-Saxon names or biblical names. So I chose a biblical name that wasn't one of the big ones. So anyway, so there was that. What else? Oh, my martial arts RPG I talked about last week. I finished it. It's all done, at least first draft of it. I'm sure there's typos and everything all over the place. I'm trying to get it polished up for the APA. And one of the things I was talking about in there was railroading. I said that it's a narrative game, but narrative doesn't have to mean railroading. So this episode's going to be about that. And it's going to be about Star Trek Discovery a little bit, a fan theory I made up. And how am I going to tie them together? I will. And it actually happened naturally. It's not even manufactured a way for me to go from my martial arts buffalo, from narrative role-playing and railroading to Star Trek Discovery. Anyway. So that's there. Let's get ready for the APA. I probably won't have an episode next week because it is APA week. So the deadline for NAPA, which is the General Science Fiction Fandom APA of the National Fantasy Fan Federation, is due Wednesday or Thursday, somewhere around there. And then Friday is the deadline for the Anchorite APA. And on top of all that, I've been asked to become the collator for A Gentle Stroll, which is the official gaming APA for the National Fantasy Fan Federation. And that's a huge honor. So I probably won't do that this issue, waiting issue, seeing that the deadline is, like I said, like 4 days. So anyway, so probably no episode next week because I'll be busy writing and then printing and collating all that stuff. Takes a lot of time for me to put the APA together. But yeah, what else? Nothing. Let's talk about the railroading thing. So I talk about this a few times on the show, and I've always just said it as an aside, and I wanted to go into more detail. And I say that I do narrative role-playing, but then I'm very sure to say, but narrative isn't the same as railroading. It can be, but it doesn't have to be. But usually that's all I say, so I'm going to dive into that today. So, because I think a lot of people, when they hear narrative, they think of that situation where the GM has said, okay, the players are going to, well, this is an example I used in the book, right? The game. The players are going to go rescue a good politician's or a good noble's, depending what time period you want to use, wife from the Yakuza. Right? And so some GMs, some narrative GMs, will then say, well, the first thing that would happen, though, of course, was the scene where the introduction, right? The scene where they get the mission from the politician. The second scene would be rising action. Leaving the politician's office, they have a fight with these 4 Yakuza thugs or whatever, right? And they have this all mapped up. This scene, that scene, that scene, that scene. All the way up to the climax of the end in the Yakuza headquarters where they rescue the politician's wife. And I don't like that, because it seems to me that if this scene, if my meeting naturally leads to the fight with the thugs, no matter what I do, then what choices am I making that are meaningful? And I don't like that. I like my players to have meaningful choices. So the way I would do that, same mission, right? Good politician getting ready to vote on something important that the Yakuza don't want. So they kidnap his wife to make sure that they vote his way. So the players have to go rescue the wife before the vote. It's a trope, but it works. So I would bring them in to have that meeting with a politician. And then I say, what do you do? So before that, okay, I've probably started out the politician. I've come up with the storyline. I probably did a rough map of the Yakuza lair. I have the stats for the Yakuza boss, so I know what he's all about, and probably one of his lieutenants or 2 of his lieutenants, and general stat for thugs, which will be used anytime they have a thug encounter. And then I just come up with a whole bunch of clues that lead them to where they need to go. And sometimes a clue will just lead to a place to get another clue. But it's different. So, like I said, I say, what do you do? And maybe the players go, do the Yakuza have a sort of a bar for their street thugs, where all the street thugs are known to hang out? Maybe we can go there and get information, or maybe we can try to blend in and, try to get recruited by them so they think we're working for them. By the way, those are 2 very different approaches. And I think that is the strength of my method, because when you script out each scene, how do you account for the players going at it in such a weird angle that they're going to try to infiltrate the Yakuza, not face it the way you thought they were? I don't know. That's why I like my line. Anyway, so the players would say, so is there this bar? Would we know about this bar? That's a great idea. I didn't think of that idea. But that's my failure. That's not their failure. I mean, that's completely within the trope. It makes sense. So why would I say no just because I didn't think about it? Yeah, of course there is. So maybe I might say, you don't know of one, but there might be one, and so they start figure out who they can ask on the street, maybe make some streetwise checks or something like that. Or maybe I would just say, yeah, everyone kind of whispers about this bar over there, whatever. And then they'd go there, and I would just make it up as I go along. Maybe they try to bribe the bartender, and he's like, oh, here. And I make up a personality for the bartender right there, and I play along. And if things are starting to drag and slow down, a couple of the thugs want to know what he's up to, and they take them outside, and you can have a little combat scene. And while all this is happening, I'm just going through my list of hints, and I'm thinking which clue would make sense for them to find here, and I give it to them, or give them 2 of them. Then the players, with that clue, with what's happened, they then decide what they want to do next. And that's all it is. It's action and reaction, all focused on the players. So the disadvantage of this system, air quotes there, is that it requires a GM who's good at improv, right? You have to make things up as you go along. You have to think off the cuff, and then you have to not contradict yourself in the future when you're making stuff up off the cuff. And I'm good at that. I hate saying stuff like that because it sounds like I'm so full of myself, but that's something. I'm listening to this podcast. Does this sound like I'm reading a script? This is what I do. I come up with an idea and I run with it. And that's my strength. The other way, where I have everything scripted, I couldn't do that. Like if I had an episode where, like some podcasters, I was reading word for word what the episode was, it would sound horrible. That is not my skill set. So anyway. But yeah, so to do it my way, you need that certain set of skills. And that intimidates some GMs. And to be honest, some players don't like that style. They want to know that there's a plan, that they're on the right track, and they're not going to go somewhere spinning their wheels. So, what I call railroading for some players, for some GMs, for some groups, that's a comfort thing. So there is this book from the Last Unicorn Games, Star Trek The Next Generation line called The Narrator's Toolkit. It was written by Kenneth Hite. And in there, he talks about how to design an adventure. And he says, when you're designing a venture, come up with two plots, the A plot and the B plot. Then write your introduction for the A plot, and that's one scene. Your introduction for the B plot, that's another scene. And then you have your rising action scene, right, for the A plot and then for the B plot. And you write these scenes and you write them each on index cards. And pretty much you're following Freytag's pyramid, the standard dramatic structure. And you're just doing these scenes around that. And then you put them in order that makes sense, and you try to tie them together near the end so that both plots end together. Troubles or Tribbles is a great one that did this, so that's not Next Generation, but right, because the A plot is what's happening with the Grain and the Klingons and the Federation official, right? And the B plot are the Tribbles that are taking over the ship. And at the end, they come together because we find out that the Tribbles ate the Grain and they died because the Grain was poisoned, right? So that's how it works. And it's a great system for writing a story. In fact, my Bob in Space story that I submitted to Analog, that has like 4 plot lines going through it. But RPG adventures, in my mind, aren't stories. There is an emergent story that comes out of play, and that is great. But that story is determined by what the players do. And what they succeed at and what they fail at. In my world, players do not succeed at every action. They fail, well, they just have to try a different approach and go around a different way or something like that. And that's fine. But like I said, the fact that Ken Hite wrote this down in this book proves that some people think that that's a good way to play. And, good for them. Not everyone has to play my way. I wouldn't want to have to play their way. So I'm not putting them down. And if that's like I said, if that's your way, I'm happy. I'm happy for you. I really am. Gaming is a game. You should enjoy it. And my way is this other way, and it's not a railroad. And that was really my only point, is that narrativism isn't a railroad. All right. Hi, friends. That's where I'm cutting this one off. That was all the stuff that I talked about, narrative and railroad. Let me know what you think. Feedback at Decahedron, you know all the drill. It will be in the show notes, or if you're watching on YouTube, it will be on screen, probably at the end of all this. Anyway, thanks for watching and or listening, and until next time, happy gaming, happy life. Bye.